So tonight at the Active Travel Cafe, we're going to start with our usual crowdsourced news update. So if you have anything that you want to share, be ready to raise your hand or even put it in the chat. We then are followed, we have one speaker tonight, and that's Izzy Romilly from Possible, who I know we've had a lot of discussion about on-demand food delivery workers and the gig economy, and all sorts of problems associated with that. And Izzy is going to share some research, from a new project that she's been working on, the Hot Wheels research project, looking at the experience of on-demand food delivery workers. So hopefully that will sort of answer some of those questions perhaps that people have had, but also prompt a good debate. But before we launch into that, who has news to share? And I can see Chris has his hands up already. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm getting in early. We've had a demo this afternoon at Kirklees from Bill Jones Associates, who are working on the LC whip for West Yorkshire currently. And it was an update of the process that they're going through, and just the kind of general ideas of drawing lines on a map of where roughly the routes are going to go, but with no detail. But I wanted to bring it up really because the comment made by the highways manager for Kirklees at the end of the session really wound me up, and I kind of want to vent about it in a way, because after all of the work on cycling and walking that we've been going through, her only real concern was whether they were going to look at areas and junctions where more motor vehicle capacity could be created as part of LC whip after any road space reallocation was done, to make sure that there's still an increase in vehicle throughput on the junctions. And it just frustrated me because it was like you still don't get it. And the main councillor was in there and was making a point for modal shift, and this person was still saying they need more capacity on the road network for cars.
Sounds incredibly frustrating. Hopefully you'll be able to talk to some of those councillors and explain perhaps a bit of that context. Mark, do you want to come in?
Hi, yeah, I'm temporarily in Liverpool today. Just to say that work has finally started at Valley Gardens 3 in Brighton. I think there's a couple of other Brighton people here. So we'll have that for the next year and a half. Sorry, the next year and a half, we're going to have some disruption, but hopefully at the end of it, there'll be a really good, those who've seen the early part of Valley Gardens, it'll be going down from there to Brighton Pier, Palace Pier, with a big new junction that's going to be a two-way cyclops, which I think is the first. So it'll be interesting for people to see that. So that's our news. And the A23 route has opened with a nice green surface as well, actually. So there's been progress, but on only one spine route.
Thank you. It's always good to have some good news. Roger, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. I'll start with another piece of good news then. Firstly, the last time I came here, I was encouraging people to donate and spread the word about the Transport Action Network legal challenge to the government's cuts to the funding for active travel. The good news is that we did secure the funding. We got ourselves to the 50k that we needed to go ahead with the legal challenge to the process by which the previous Secretary of State cut the funding, not taking account of the legal the legal requirements to have regard to stability and certainty of cycling, walking investment strategies and so on. So we're going ahead with that challenge. We will need to raise another 20k more, but we've got till kind of sometime in the spring to do that. It was the 50k mark that we needed to reach, and we got there. There was one donation of over £3,000 that came in on the final day that took us over the line, thank goodness, because otherwise we actually weren't going to go ahead. Yeah, that legal challenge goes ahead, so that's one bit of really good news. The other little bits and pieces, they're mostly to do with sort of planning I hope you've spotted that 2 reports have come out recently, one from the Royal Town Planning Institute, one more only yesterday. Sorry, the RTPI one was, I think, 10 days ago, and then another one yesterday from New Economics Foundation, both saying basically we're failing to join up transport and land use. So housing is becoming, well, the RTP report said, we're not reducing car dependence. The NEF report said we're worsening it. They were looking at slightly different time periods, but the NEF report was kind of starker in its findings. At a time when the government is thinking about, a whole overhaul of the planning system, but really isn't thinking about sustainable transport implications, they're only really thinking about how do they build 1.5 million homes and minimize the loss of greenbelt land, and they're not thinking about sustainable transport. So 2 good hard-hitting reports that say they really need to, because otherwise we're going to build another 1.5 million homes that will continue to increase car dependence. Quick reminder, if you want to write to your MP about exactly that, you can do so via our campaign, lowtrafficfuture.org.uk/close-knit communities. That's what we're calling the idea, that places should be designed so that everything is close together, so it's easy to get around by active travel and sustainable transport. Close-knit communities. Write to your MP via that link. Thanks. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, if you can put those reports, links to those reports in the chat, if you have them available as well.
Will do.
Great, thank you. Ruth.
Hello. 2 things, and as usual, I don't know how to add things, but I don't know if anyone watched Chris Boreman this morning at COP. It is on YouTube, and someone clever will no doubt find the link to be able to put on. It was very interesting. And the woman from Holland, who I've forgotten who she was, he asked the question, how do we bring people with us? And she said, you talk about adding, not change. So as in adding lots of parking. I mean, she said lots of parking. I thought, what's a car parking? But she meant bike parking. So it was all about adding things, not changing things, was the way they introduced stuff. So if people have got time to watch, it was an hour. And as I say, someone clever can add this as a link, because I'm no good at that. And the second thing is that the APPG for cycling and walking are doing an inquiry, or I never know the word, into cycling as social justice. And anybody can actually write in. You can do your own submission, evidence till the 16th of December. And apologies again, I don't know how to add things into the chat, but I'm sure there is somebody out of the people who are on here would know about this and could add it in for me. But it's something the APPG of cycling and walking are working on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth. And yes, if somebody is able to find that link, it would be great if you could add it to the chat. And I would really stress that, the more evidence they get, the more people who write, that evidence, it stays there as well, on the kind of the government's websites in relation to that inquiry. So it's a really good kind of line in the sand of saying this is where we are and this is where we need to be going. I think Claire has already added to the chat the link to the new school streets guidance that Active Travel England have published today. It's good to see that. And also I did notice there are a number of inspectorate jobs there, and that don't necessarily require a lot of qualifications. So if anyone's interested in a career move or change, or who has an interest in active travel, they might want to look at those. And then, Matthew, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just very quickly, Sally, I was obviously reading through the school streets document, and it does, it's got a great opener talking about the benefits for school and local community, and it also very early on says that the negatives that people are worried about either don't exist, don't happen, or are very minor. So really bold in the opening few pages, it's selling the benefits of school streets. And it also stresses that when local authorities engage with communities, whether that be schools, residents, businesses, etc., that they follow the good practice set out by the LGA. That's behind a paywall or a membership wall, but I'm pretty sure there'll be a workaround for people to see the best practice for engaging, to avoid all those pylons and distortions of people from outside the area trying to change the result. So I was very positive about it. I just had to say that.
Yeah. Thank you. Does anybody else have any news to share? Don't see any hands up. I just also have finally to add that Professor Alison Stenning and I have just published an article on making space for children's play and mobility, and I will put that in the chat. It's open access. It's just it's a really short, really easy read. So hopefully that's useful for some people. H, you put a hand up. Do you have something to contribute?
Yeah, I was just noticing the conversation about volunteers going and doing things. 2003, Roger will remember this, that we crowdsourced with volunteers a survey of the 2,500 railway stations in the UK for cycle parking. And we used about 3,000 volunteers. We did 80% of the stations in a month. And I'm just wondering whether there's some little questions that people are asking, whether we could use the social media, you go through Active Travel Cafe and see whether we can crowdsource other information on the sort of thing we need to discover about active travel. For example, quaxing, shopping by bike, being able to take your bike into the store and load it, which I do regularly. And I just wonder how many other people are doing it.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. That's some good questions. I'm not sure whether anyone has the resource to do that, but some good ideas there. Thanks, H. And we're going to move on now then to the speaker part of our evening, if nobody else has anything to add. So I am delighted to have Izzy Romilly here from Possible, who's going to share some work on a research project, the Hot Wheels research project that they've been developing. And Izzy, over to you. Do you want to try sharing your slides?
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, I will try sharing. We did test this, so hopefully that's working.
Yeah.
Can everyone see my slides?
Yeah, you want to go to slide 2?
Great. Okay. Yeah. So I will be in slideshow mode. So like Sally, please do just like interrupt me if you can't hear me or
all good. It's all
I'm
good.
frozen or anything like that. Yeah. So thanks so much everyone for having me. Thanks Sally for the invite. So just to give you a bit of background, I'm Izzy Romilly from Possible. So I work on some of our sustainable transport projects. And you might know some of my colleagues, Leo, Hera, Carolyn, who I think is on the call. We are a small charity based in London and we work around the UK on public engagement in the climate crisis. And transport is a really big area of work for us, and we've weighed in heavily to LTNs and ULEZ. So yeah, we basically have been working on a research and campaign project called Hot Wheels for about kind of nine months to a year now. And just some things to say before I get into it are that we actually haven't published this report yet, so this is a complete exclusive. So we're still finalising the report on our findings, so if you would just bear that in mind and kind of keep it non-specific if you're sharing anything online, that would be really appreciated. And I guess another thing to say as well is that we really wanted to understand the, I guess, the kind of lived experience of people doing food delivery work, and then look at what analysis we could do around rider numbers, modal share, the kind of pollution and CO2 impact and collision statistics, but we haven't gone into loads of detail about infrastructure specifically. So again, just kind of bear that in mind. So Hot Wheels is a project that we've worked on for about 9 months now. It was funded by Impact on Urban Health as part of their freight and air pollution workstream. And our key partners in this were IWGB, the trade union, and they have a couriers and logistics branch that represents lots of different people working in couriers and logistics, but including on-demand food delivery workers. And we also worked with Green Gumption, my colleague Duncan at Climate Studio, and Dr. Robert Davis, who I think is also on the call or might be at some point, and he might want to chip into the Q&A. So yeah, I didn't come up with the project. Leo and Hera did. So so why Hot Wheels? These are some of the questions that were floating around in the kind of conception of this project. So I guess, why did we feel this is an important area to go into? So firstly, like, food delivery couriers are increasingly visible. It definitely in London, and I assume lots of other kind of dense cities and towns in the UK as well, but they're not necessarily kind of involved in or represented in a lot of the debates that are happening around transport and urban environments. Secondly, we found like data, kind of publicly accessible data on couriers, how far they're traveling, what modes they're using, was quite difficult to find. Worth saying that we didn't approach delivery companies during this project to ask them for their data, but we couldn't find a lot that was publicly available. There were some really helpful reports out there. There was a 2007 report from TfL. There was a master's thesis by Georgia Core in 2019. Nicola Christie and Heather Ward paper from over the last, a few papers over the last 6 years or so, which are really useful, but generally it kind of feels like there's not a lot out there. Yeah, given kind of all the changes that are happening in urban environments, how do food delivery couriers feel about that? And then given the massive growth in food delivery that's happened over the last 4 years, especially since 2020 and the lockdowns when delivery culture kind of took off even more, given all of that, what contribution is on-demand food delivery making to transport emissions, road danger and air pollution? And then there's the whole kind of thorny issue of illegally modified two-wheelers, which are having a backlash on the e-bike industry and cycling generally. We wanted to find out a bit more about that from couriers' perspectives as well. So yeah, we kind of focused on London for the purposes of this project, but we hope it will be kind of useful and interesting for people across the UK, because I'm sure that similar issues are cropping up. Well, I know similar issues are cropping up across the UK. So firstly, just defining on-demand food delivery work. We're thinking here about companies and the self-employed riders and couriers and drivers who work for companies like Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Just Eat. There are more and more of these companies, but those are some of the kind of the major big ones. These people are self-employed. They often own or rent their own vehicles. They're not usually provided by the company, although there are some smaller companies that have a different model where they do provide vehicles. And really importantly I think what we're going to go into today, people are working on a pay per delivery model. So there's a kind of dynamic pricing approach where each food delivery is assigned a custom price, which is based on a various kind of set of factors which are not very transparent. And that is the pay that is then offered to couriers to deliver it, with a kind of added schedule as well, so kind of estimated schedule of how long it's going to take them. And most of these deliveries, in London at least, are done on kind of various forms of single person transport on two wheels. And again, people are self-employed, so that means no sick pay, no holiday pay, zero job security. But on the other hand, a lot of flexibility over their hours and how much they want to work. You've probably heard of some of the debates that have happened in the last few years about employment status. So probably is worth me saying as well that we didn't get a clear picture from the people that we spoke to, that there was a consensus about whether people would prefer to be employed and would prefer to have a kind of pay per hour, pay per time model, versus people who preferred the flexibility and the kind of pay per drop model. It was, in our survey, it was actually about 50-50. So just to say that as well, there wasn't a consensus either side. So there are a few different pieces to the research that we did. So firstly, we did a survey that covered demographic information, transport behaviour, and people's feelings and attitudes about their work and about air pollution as well. That was shared in IWGB networks, and we had a very high degree of confidence that everyone who responded to that survey was a genuine courier who was working in London in the kind of target audience that we wanted to speak to. But we had a very small sample size for that. So most of the stats that we're using have come from that group, unless stated otherwise. And that was 45 to 50 people. So just bear that in mind for kind of for all of this. And then we also, because of the sample size, we also shared that survey on Reddit because we wanted to kind of verify it against a bigger audience. But obviously with that bigger audience where we got about 120 responses, we obviously we didn't really know whether people were couriers or whether they were even based in London. We did focus groups and interviews. We spoke to 12 people in the kind of summer. We had a company called Nationwide Data Collection, did some traffic counts for us, which were at 3 locations in South London, all covering protected cycling infrastructure. And for that was done by video, and we used, or the Nationwide Data Collection used Cube backpacks as a proxy for determining whether or not people were delivery riders. So that might not have been 100% accurate, but I think it gave us a very good idea. And then What our partners on this project looked at was road danger statistics, air pollution, and the CO2 impacts. So just to get into the qualitative findings from the focus groups, this is an overview of what couriers generally said about their work. Obviously, there wasn't necessarily consensus between all the people that we spoke to on absolutely every one of these. But the first one was just completely unsurprisingly, food delivery work is really physically intense and stressful. People said, you start from zero every day. It's obviously a job where you're just exercising constantly. You're constantly kind of have lots of visual stimulation, exercise, you're tired, you have to go out in all weathers. And that creates a level of kind of stress and insecurity that if you're not pushing yourself all the time, then you're not going to be earning what you need to earn. People also said that in real terms, the pay has really fallen since 2020. And it was never that high to begin with, but people there was this kind of feeling that there used to be more good days kind of in the run up to 2020 and in 2020, and that maybe during the lockdown specifically I think one person called it a bit of a kind of golden time for delivery work. And then actually since then, there's been a kind of slump in earnings. And connected to that and tying into the pay per drop model, people are working really long hours to make ends meet. So quite a lot of people told us that they were on the roads for 12 to 15 hours, which from a health and safety perspective is obviously really concerning. And also when we looked at weekly hours as well, I can't remember off the top of my head, I didn't write it down in this, but I think it was something like a third of people were working 50% more than the kind of accepted definition of full-time hours. So again, just to stress, there's kind of lots of different risk factors that are playing in here. So yeah, we heard that again, people were traveling really extreme distances, 20, 30 miles maybe, but also well over 100 for a lot of people per day. And something that comes up a lot is this kind of conflict between speed and safety. So the delivery company has given you a schedule for delivering the order, and you want to do it as quickly as possible because then you can move on to the next one and up your earnings for the day. But at the same time, that creates a kind of conflict with with the amount of road danger that you're exposed to. So we have found that there was actually a preference for protected cycle lanes and lower traffic routes, which I think was kind of quite helpful from a campaigning perspective. People told us that they feel at risk of crime, and that was quite a broad kind of statement. So not just road crime and the risk of collisions, but also thefts. People told us about being mugged, about being kind of held up by people trying to steal their vehicle, and sexual harassment as well, which they kind of faced on the doorstep. Some of them referred to their relationships with the apps being quite opaque or kind of tricky. So, not always getting a clear answer when they made an appeal, if they got a kind of warning on their account and things like that. And then another important aspect of this work as well was that lots of couriers told us that they do something called multi-apping, which is where you basically use multiple accounts at once. So you might be, say, doing deliveries for Deliveroo and Uber Eats at the same time, let's say. But actually, some delivery companies say that that's not technically allowed. But people told us that basically they didn't really have a choice; they had to do it. And I think one of the findings in the UCL paper a couple of years ago was that actually that kind of focus on the phone screen as well was one of the kind of many risk factors kind of playing into this as well. So I'll just give you a kind of minute to read this, but here's just a few of the quotes, the things that people said to us during interviews, focus groups. So just kind of, yeah, you can take a minute to read this. But again, the themes that are coming up here are the kind of the stress, the intensity, the kind of always pushing yourself kind of nature of it. The fact that fees are perceived to have been going down in real terms. People are working longer, trying to fit in as many deliveries as they can, but also the anxiety of not wanting to risk a customer complaining about how slowly you delivered their order, or the kind of repercussions that you might get from the app. So you could kind of lose your job overnight if your account was terminated. And people saying that they, nowadays they're finding that they have to work longer hours. I'm sure that's connected to cost of living crisis, rent and energy going up as well. And then, yeah, just on the right, again, there's a quote about just all the kind of expenses that are inherent in being self-employed. So I'll just give people a minute to read this and then I'll move on. I'm going to check the chat as well in case there's anything in there I should respond to. Cool. So I'll move on. Sorry, I'll move on from this one. Oh. So some of the key findings, aside from our findings in the focus groups and interviews, were that we estimated that in inner London, up to 10% of people using protected cycling infrastructure are on-demand food delivery couriers. And that came from the traffic counts that we did in Lambeth and Southwark, where we recorded how many people were using those lanes and then looked at how many of them were wearing like cube backpacks. And I think, and also that was kind of on different days of the week. So that was like 16-hour counts on Tuesdays, on a Tuesday, a Thursday and a Saturday. So we kind of covered a few different days of the week just to account for that kind of the amount of variance that you're going to get between like a Tuesday and a Saturday for takeaway deliveries. But yeah, I just think that's a really kind of powerful stat in terms of how much actually couriers are beneficiaries of protected cycling infrastructure. And I think in terms of kind of councils who might be thinking about like stakeholder engagement or that kind of thing, I think it just really shows the need for them to be like actively engaging directly with couriers and their unions. And I think in terms of making a case for cycle lanes as well, we really wanted to look into the idea of cycle lanes as a workplace safety issue. And I think that this kind of really validates that. In our survey, 60% of people told us that they always or constantly feel at risk when they're at work, and 75% told us that they always or regularly feel at risk. Again, just kind of really shocking, and something that we kind of hope that the availability of protected cycling infrastructure and less congestion can help address. 70% told us that they prefer cycle lanes or lower traffic routes when they're working, which again, I think is real kind of validation for how urgent making those kind of changes is. So that's the kind of focus on cyclists. You know, we were interested in the idea of the kind of workplace safety issue and how cyclists were experiencing the roads. But then looking at motorcyclists and the many couriers who use motorbikes, I mean, again, just they're really kind of in harm's way from doing their work on a motorbike. So 11 to 15 times more likely to die in London on the roads, and approximately 4 times more likely to be seriously injured than cyclists. And then in addition to that, they're roughly 3 times more likely to be involved in a collision that results in death or serious injury to another road user who's normally a pedestrian than a cyclist is. So that kind of suggests that there's actually a really big opportunity around for road danger and also for air pollution, and also for potentially for running costs as well, from incentivizing or enabling people in some way to switch from motorbikes or like fossil fueled motorbikes to legal electric bikes. So moving on to these kind of so-called modded bikes. So here we're obviously talking about illegal e-bikes, and I think there's probably different types of these bikes that are illegal. There's the kind of modified e-bikes that can go much faster over the speed limit, but there's also bikes that have been kind of built, you know, by buying parts online and stuff like that. And I wanted to include this quote from someone who took part in a focus group, because I thought it really brought together I think just a really valuable perspective on that issue. Like, obviously these illegal bikes are causing lots of problems for the kind of legitimate e-bike industry, but at the same time there's a reason why there is a demand for these bikes in the first place. And people, you know, there are lots of issues in terms of access to like legal e-bike technology, and you know, people were saying the fact that you know, they felt that you couldn't do your job as easily on a legal electric bike. Maybe that's because of the kind of the speed limit or the power, or just the kind of financial access to a legal bike. But ultimately, it does feel like there's a lot of kind of injustice wrapped up in this whole situation. So just to get into some of the numbers, we found that, and again, this kind of estimates of modal share are based on a very small sample size, so take it with a pinch of salt. But our kind of best estimate was that there's, again, just looking at London, there's 94 kilometres of on-demand food delivery work that's done by bike, 116 million by moped, 43 million by motorbike, and 24 million by car and van. So just huge potential for electrification for the modes here that are fossil fueled, but also for cutting road danger by enabling people to switch from mopeds or motorbikes onto legal e-bikes. And then something else that we wanted to look at was what impact is on-demand food delivery having on air pollution. And we kind of thought it would be more, but actually, as you can see, there is so much car and van traffic in London that actually the impact of on-demand food delivery is very, very small. It doesn't mean it's not worth tackling, but I think just this kind of circle on the right, I think just really puts it in perspective in terms of in terms of who's really doing the majority of driving in London, or by what mode, and where air pollution is coming from. So I'm not going to spend too much time on our recommendations because there were quite a few of them, but a couple that I just wanted to pick up on were the idea of scrappage schemes or social leasing policies that create genuinely affordable access to legal e-bikes aimed at couriers who most need them. So targeted access to electric mobility was something that we looked at earlier in the year on a programme with looking at care workers and how, basically saying the government should help care workers get access to electric cars via like targeted social leasing schemes. And the kind of theory is that, for people who really do need to drive, they're often on low incomes, and actually targeted schemes to help them do that is on an electric in an electric vehicle would be a really good thing to do, while focusing on traffic reduction for the people who can afford to swap out their mode of travel. And again, just like I'll kind of pick up on the third one, which is really around acknowledging delivery workers as key stakeholders of traffic schemes. So if in our traffic counts we estimated that 10% of people were food delivery workers, it's just they're really key voices and beneficiaries. People told us that actually something, and again, people on low incomes really affected by this, that often mapping platforms weren't updated quickly enough to help them avoid fines where traffic restrictions have been implemented. So one of our recommendations was for councils to ensure that kind of action was taken quickly. And mandatory data sharing agreements would be really helpful as well. So that's been brought in New York, and we'd like to see the same here as well. So for national government, I mean, nothing you'd not expect. More dedicated funding for road danger reduction measures, which will massively benefit food delivery workers, and also just kind of look properly at what's happening around illegally modified motorbikes. And for companies, it's really about increasing pay and pay transparency, and trying to take away the incentive for people to rush and be kind of hurrying all the time, making sure that people don't have to work unreasonable hours or travel at unsafe speeds to make a living wage, but also improve their communication with delivery riders as well. So trying to take pressure off them to complete orders as quickly as possible, and having really reliable channels of communication in place so that they can get issues resolved faster. And again, kind of trialing schemes around helping people move from motorbikes to legal e-bikes, or to electric mopeds or motorbikes where e-bikes really aren't possible. And there's lots of different models for companies to do that. And some of the next step for us, we want to keep getting this in the media, and when this report comes out, we're hoping to do some of that in partnership with IWGB, hoping to engage with the APPG on cycling and walking. We'd like to think more about how this is connected to our work on like curbside strategies, and actually whether curbside strategies can be a route for getting facilities hubs, charging points, kind of rest points for for delivery workers as well. And yeah, we're looking for partners and funding to think about trialing a scrappage or social leasing scheme as well. And that's all from me. So I hope I haven't gone massively over time, Sally.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm sure everybody would like to join me in saying thanks for that. It's been such a kind of hot topic over the last few weeks, and we're hoping to have a series of invited talks of different people who are doing work on this, because I just think it's going to be on it really, it's not something that's going to be resolved overnight, sadly, because of all the issues that you've highlighted, that these people are working in really bad conditions, and there isn't a lot of political support, I think, necessarily for them to change that. Lots of questions. I'm going to just start pulling them. Actually, well, should we let Bob come in first? Bob, did you want to come in and ask a question or make a comment?
Make a couple of comments, if I may. I contributed to this study, which is done with a lot of work by Izzy and others. 2 points. First of all, the road danger point, which I worked on, it's very, very important in general terms to note that motorcycling is not only a lot more hazardous than cycling, it's much more dangerous to other road users, which is not normally talked about, and we need to do that. So the whole question of shifting from moped, motorbike, scooters to e-bikes is, is very clear on this, and is something to really get stuck into, and it would apply in other areas. Right, now the second thing is where things get a bit complicated, and that is about the definition of e-bike, because, as has been pointed out, the people you see going past are not on what is legally an e-bike. It has been illegally converted into an unregistered electric motorcycle. And from time to time, the police will come up and in various parts of the country will confiscate these vehicles because they're completely illegal, and will deal with them accordingly. And on social media, we do spend a lot of time saying, no, you didn't confiscate e-bikes, you confiscated illegal electric motorcycles. Now, we do that, but the problem is it is very easy to override the governor. And what makes them legally e-bikes is not being able to go with the motor over 25 kph, 15.5 mph. And that's where we have problems. We have problems legally, and we have problems in terms of trying to shift people from one thing to the other. A lot of the delivery riders feel that they won't be able to do their job properly unless it's overridden. That has to be dealt with. There's also another issue in that if they're using bike lanes, when it comes to the cycling counts, which people do, it's not often clear whether they have actually included people who are not cyclists, they're motorcyclists. And that needs to be looked at when it comes to the counting. That's the basic points I wanted to make. But there's a lot of stuff happening about e-bikes and what their status is, and how the regulations may be changed, and what would happen to people with disabilities who want to be able to have more power, and so on. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, and I think I think you touched on that, Izzy, the kind of impact that it has and the reasons that people are making those choices. But there's a sort of bottom up, why are people doing this, and how does it feel, and why are they pushed into making those decisions? And then there's that kind of regulation that's not caught up with many aspects, I guess, of their work. Do you want to come back on any of those points that Bob's raised?
No, yeah, it's a really complex area, and I think there's obviously like competing kind of and conflicting interest to some extent. I think it was interesting to hear, as Bob alluded to during the focus group, some people say that actually a kind of legal e-bike isn't necessarily kind of powerful or fast enough for them to feel that they can do their job efficiently. And actually, when we proposed the idea of a social leasing scheme to switch from mopeds and motorbikes to legal e-bikes, some people actually said, oh, I wouldn't go for it because I need a moped or motorbike to do my job because it's faster, it's more comfortable to sit on for longer. To some extent they didn't have to worry about charging as well. So there was a concern that actually their work would be, they wouldn't be able to work at the speed that they wanted to work or needed to work if they switched to illegal e-bikes. I think, yeah, that kind of opens up a question about the kind of restrictions on legal e-bike technology.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of, because some of them that we see here, many of them you don't even have to pedal, and if you're covering that kind of distance, you can imagine that makes a huge difference. H, do you want to come in?
Yeah, have we got me now?
Yep.
Oh, good. I'd come back on a couple of things. One, we've got in Scotland, we've got Section 97 of the Road Scotland Act, and it gives the local authority powers to license all commercial use of the road, public road, as street trading. And that would mean you tackle it at source. Anybody who wants to deliver stuff on the street using riders must be registered and licensed. And then you set KPI and terms and conditions that they must have a log of their riders, the legality of the bikes that are being used and so forth. And that equally applies to cars. With a fatality in Birmingham where the food delivery rider, your driver, killed a 5-year-old and carried on to deliver the food. And, and the food, I think Food Hub UK was the principal who was running the service, and sort of distanced themselves. Oh, no, he wasn't an employee. And so we've got to try and nail the relationship between the people who are doing the deliveries and the people who are pseudo-employing them. And I posted a few questions to Izzy, but I know our local registered logistics operator, she hasn't mentioned Zedify at all, but they actually employ staff, and they have core contracts with regular people to do the work. They won't touch every, but delivery mates are doing every. And basically the guys get given 200 parcels to deliver in a shift. And it's no wonder that they're rushing around cutting corners. And so I think we've got to regulate the principles, the Deliveroos, the Uber Eats, the delivery mates have got to be registered as delivery companies and keep records and make sure that the people they employ are proper employees.
Thanks, H. Izzy, do you want to come back on any of those points?
Yeah, I guess I should have said we mostly, the companies that people were working for that we spoke to were mostly some of the kind of big name like food delivery companies, but there were also a couple of people who mentioned and actually said they'd had a really good experience with certain delivery companies, maybe ones where they'd had a vehicle provided or they had some kind of other support. And so there obviously are kind of different examples of kind of good and bad practice, and I think some of the smaller companies were actually doing some quite good work. And yeah, I think all of the issues around licensing and regulation are kind of to some extent baked into the gig economy, just kind of companies like existing outside of the kind of the remit of or operating outside of the remit of kind of local and national government to some extent. And I think more controls on those companies would be a really good thing. But again, like there wasn't a consensus amongst those people that we spoke to, because the idea of kind of pay per drop also introduced the idea that if you work really hard, you can actually earn more. So you can earn like a much better wage if you work really hard. So there's that kind of tension as well.
Thank you. I'm going to take Natalie, and then I'm going to take a couple from the chat. I hope you don't
Yeah.
mind hanging on.
Hi, Izzy. Actually, my question was fairly similar to H's in terms of what I was wanting to find out is a question of liability. I think we have a central government responsibility to make it clear that these delivery companies have a liability issue towards their drivers, both in terms of how their drivers behave on the road and also in terms of what they're riding. And Uber has a responsibility to make sure that the cars that are being driven by their drivers are roadworthy. Surely we should be pushing for the same thing in the delivery market. So if a driver is driving an illegal vehicle, it's Deliveroo who are on the hook for them having done that. And then we'll find that the behavior will change very quickly because these big organizations don't want to be on the hook. And then they will then make sure that their drivers are not souping up vehicles Now, obviously, that means they might end up having more mopeds and bikes, but at least we would do away with this really uncomfortable situation where everybody's screaming about the danger of e-bikes when they're the future, because we're seeing these souped up bikes on our streets. And then on the flip side, once you've got government needing to impose a legal and liability framework on these organisations, there's probably also social naming and shaming that we could be looking at doing. And do you really want to order from Deliveroo? Do you know how badly they treat their workers? Type campaigns. Next time you want to order your Chinese, think about doing it through this organisation who treats their drivers more appropriately and more considerately.
Thank you, Natalie. Izzy, do you want to pick up on any of those points? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, no, just totally agree with all of that. I think, yeah, one thing I was going to mention is that TfL, Transport for London, did introduce a charter that was kind of, I guess, a relatively kind of, like, I think it was really positive, but it's kind of quite a softly approach. So they had like some of the major delivery companies sign a safety charter which said we'll commit to doing these like 10 things to make sure that our operations are like safe and sustainable. And I think that was introduced a year ago, but I guess what we kind of felt was that whether or not those were kind of made, well, basically the kind of recommendations in that charter, or the commitments in that charter basically weren't kind of trickling through into people's like experiences on the ground. So I think it is a kind of good start in terms of engagement, but it kind of doesn't go far enough at the same time.
Thanks. I'm going to take a few questions from the chat, and I mean you might have covered aspects of this, but if there are things that we haven't really gone into, I think somebody has asked, where do you see the new government taking regulation? Lots of issues: e-moped supply chain, four-wheel cycle vans, 500-watt motors, enforcing registration of high-speed e-bikes, so on. Can you make some general comment?
I'm not super plugged into like the kind of e-bike regulation actually, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that. But I mean, I guess what we heard is that maybe kind of looking at like slightly loosening the regulations around speed and power might be good, but at the same time kind of making sure there is enforcement on the vehicles that can cause the most danger to other people. And I think just generally kind of making, I think treating mobility as a social good, and I think in the context of food delivery work that would mean like a radical change in how accessible legally bikes are, and I think that could go a long way as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking as well, some of the differences, and certainly outside London, where this is kind of flaring up as a real perceived problem is in because there's so many more pedestrianised town centres. And again, I suppose I wondered what you thought about that. That's maybe a little bit of a different context, but yeah, is it the same sort of set of solutions?
In terms of like pedestrianised town centres?
Yeah. So the big pushback in many towns and cities outside of London against these vehicles is that they're using pedestrianised streets, because there are lots of pedestrianised streets. Is that something that came up in London, or is it not so much?
No, not really. That didn't come up at all, because I don't think there are really areas in London that are totally pedestrianised that people are kind of talking about in the context of food delivery work anyway. The people that I spoke to, just they weren't based in areas where there was kind of widespread pedestrianisation. Yeah.
I'm going to take another one. Somebody's asked, and this is a good question, did anything come up in the focus groups of around the complex factors around undocumented workers, that this might be the only work that some people can get?
Yeah, so it didn't come up specifically in the sense that people were kind of raising that issue, but I think definitely there is definitely it's an issue. And I think there was a sense that, and this has been reported in the news as well, there's been articles on this over the last few years about kind of police raids that have kind of targeted food delivery workers, and also about kind of immigration status as well. So I think someone left a comment in the chat about that happening in New York. Is that right? But I think, there was a feeling that definitely that people people kind of referred to being stopped by the police, and in some cases they were kind of, you know, saying, you know, I don't know why they stopped me because I'm here legally, or, you know, I'm not an undocumented worker and things like that. So I think definitely there's that kind of dynamic is there for sure.
Yeah, thanks. We're going to go back to taking questions from the room. Ruth, do you want to come in and ask yours?
Hi, Izzy. Brilliant presentation. Thank you very much. One of the issues which has vaguely been covered, but I want to bring it up again, is policing. I know that people have a lot of sympathy for the riders for all the reasons that you've given, but my issue, as we're privileged enough in Chiswick to have proper cycle lanes, which is segregated, as it were, or separated, is that they're using these lanes. And if they have got engines which take them faster than normal people who cycle, then really, the issue for me is, why can't they be on the road like other cars, motorbikes, mopeds are? And we know that the Dutch do have certain rules about what level of moped can be on a shared use path. And then if it's going at more of a speed where they have to wear a helmet, then they can't be. Did that come up at all? Because for me, I have great sympathy for them, but I don't want them on the lane that I'm using where I can't get out of the way.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair enough. Like, I think you should, I guess, whatever your role, whatever you're doing, you should be in the bit of the road that's like most appropriate for you. And if you're on a moped, you probably shouldn't be in the cycle lane. And again, I think, yeah, that kind of again like ties into I guess kind of bigger picture of traffic reduction and congestion as well. Like, if the roads were safer and there was less traffic's still going up in London. If there was less of it, would people feel less of a need to escape the congestion by going in a cycle lane? So, you know, people said, like, I'll do whatever's quickest. If that means going in a cycle lane, I'll go in a cycle lane. If it means going in the road, I'll do that. So yeah, I think, you know, for me, a lot of it kind of just comes down to like, get more cars off the road, make more space for people who work on the roads, get more cars off the road, and then people will kind of, there'll be less conflict between people who who need to be there.
Thanks. Mark, do you want to come in with your question or comment?
Thanks. Yeah, it was me about the New York issue. And in New York, it's very much seen as a crackdown on immigrants generally, or racial minorities as well. And as I said, if you see a Wall Street banker on an e-bike, which is illegal or has been, the police don't do anything about it. But I wanted to talk about whether you'd spoken to the police. I just want to give a little context. I have to be careful what words I pick so I don't get arrested. Contempt of court, but I was on a jury for a road rage incident between a delivery driver in a car and a delivery cyclist, where the cyclist was punched in the face, had a broken jaw. And I got accused of being biased, being on the jury, because I said you can't just do that. The driver was at fault, but let's say that the verdict was 11-1 in the end, and I can't say anything more about it than that. But the police's attitude and the CPS attitude and the judge and everyone else on the jury was, oh, they were on a bike, they were at fault. They must have been at fault. Have you talked to the police about how they enforce and how they deal with this? And in London, it would be the Met, but obviously other police forces or National Police Chief Council, about how they look at this issue.
We actually haven't. That hasn't been part of our project. I think it's something we'd really like to do. But yeah, no, we just kind of haven't. We haven't, as a result of kind of, I guess, how much time we've had. But yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to talk to them about what they enforce and how. And again, just like tying that into the kind of practices of delivery companies.
Thanks.
Thank you. Claire, I'll take your question, and I'm going to go back to take some more from the chat.
Hi, yeah, it was more just to add a little bit of context, Sally, from some of the things I picked up. So there's a question in the chat about riding for different companies, and actually through some of the research I've done, actually that's the whole point of the kind of gig economy model, or particularly for companies like Deliveroo, is that a rider is entitled to ride for as many companies as they like. And this is a problem because one of the questions you could reasonably ask is, well, you know, people could report, you know, incidences of riding illegally, but if you can't be sure who that rider's riding for, because there's no requirement on them to wear, for instance, the uniform for that riding for that company that they're delivering for, because they could be delivering for anyone. So that I thought was quite interesting. I'm not making a judgment either way on who's in the right or wrong, but just actually understanding that the lack of regulation around the business models leads to a lot of strange things that you would think would be simple to fix but aren't. So the thing about you don't actually know who someone's riding for is one. In terms of the point about the compliance with sort of regulation, I think the companies are very clear, that if you're driving a car, then you need to have a driving license, and they've got an obvious route to checking whether that's in place or not. But I guess because bikes don't have any regulations around them, then their out is to say, well, that's not for us to enforce. No, we don't obviously want regulations around bikes per se, but I think this is where the lack of regulation around the illegally modified bikes is definitely an issue. And then just to add a bit about enforcement in Greater Manchester. So Greater Manchester Police have started to enforce, have started to do more actions against delivery riders, and that is almost exclusively focused on the sort of illegal bikes element. It's becoming a growing issue in Manchester city centre, and so GMP are kind of reacting to that. And I think when they do that, they're focused on illegally modified bikes. And if you're in Manchester, you'll have seen them post on Twitter, that they don't really have to try very hard to just sweep up a whole load of illegal bikes. And in their post, they do also mention, that they will usually encounter a few instances of people not having the right to work papers, but that's not what they're primarily targeting. So that's just a bit of context from Manchester.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you. Oh,
Yeah, I'll be out in about 10 minutes.
Mute Bob, sorry. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, that's really useful context. I don't know if there's any of those points that you want to pick up, Izzy. There are still questions, and I'm really sorry if I've missed anybody, so you please do stick your hand up if you have something burning to ask, but it's really tricky, I think, to follow them sometimes in the chat. Somebody has asked though, was anything raised or recommended about in terms of kind of rest hubs, safe places where people can shelter, go to the toilet, charge their bikes, whatever that is. And I guess that comes back to maybe that point about charging. You were talking about people sort of, if you've got an e-bike, you've got to charge it up, and yeah, where do you do that? Where can you do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think for us, this kind of ties back into, again, just like road space reallocation around traffic reduction, removing parked cars, and then through that creating more space, more kind of public spaces for things like facilities hubs for people. So having a kind of curbside strategy at a local authority level that looks at taking away car parking spaces and replacing them with lots of different things that support sustainable modes of transport. And one of the ones that would be for food delivery workers would be places where they can recharge bikes or swap batteries, or just sit and kind of and rest for a while. That was definitely a worry that people had, that the kind of charging issue would be quite difficult, because if you had to go home every time you wanted to charge your e-bike battery, actually that's takes quite a lot of time out of your day. But if there was a kind of network of places where people could kind of drop into and then spend their break charging batteries or whatever they needed to do, then that would be really helpful.
And somebody has asked, have any other countries tackled this issue with success?
I don't know, actually. I'd love to know if anyone knows more about it than I do. But yeah, I don't know what they've done in the Netherlands or in other places. It sounds like quite a lot of I mean, New York have obviously kind of done the kind of data sharing agreement with companies, which is interesting. But yeah, beyond that, I'm actually not too sure.
Yes. H, do you know anything more on that point? Do you want to? Oh, no, you're muted now.
Oh, that's it. Thanks, Sally. I was just sort of catching up with a couple of things. It's sort of the regulation of it. I think we need to make some exemplars and track it back to source, but also our expectations of the public. When you realise that cost per item shipped up by trunk haul on the road for distribution for online shopping is something like 3p an item. And prices are being continually pared down because everybody expects their deliveries free or at very low cost. And that is forcing the issue as well. Plus the demand for the riders and final, their third-party logistics, 3PL deliveries. They're being forced into delivering a huge workload in a shift. 200 drops in an 8-hour shift. And you realise how fast that means they've got to go in and drop the load each time they're delivering. That's causing the problem.
Just sort of on that, I guess I'm just going to take a couple more from the chat and then we'll come back to Lee. On that point of kind of working hours and working conditions, a couple of people have asked questions in relation to deliveries. So somebody wanted to know if the number or time of deliveries on a given app are restricted, how can you prevent multi-apping to circumvent it? And somebody else has asked, do you have thoughts on mandatory employer tachographs? So, tracking riders, I guess, so that to sort of understand what they're doing.
I'm really sorry, Sally, do you mind repeating the first one?
The first one was around the multi-apping, how can you restrict it? Or I guess, is that something that you think would be desirable anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I guess people were saying that the reason that they multi-act was that they could was basically make more money. So I think the root issue is basically the level of pay.
Yeah.
That's the kind of reason why people are doing it. Yeah. And then the second question was that
tracking what riders are doing, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. That feels quite complex because I guess on the one hand, the idea of kind of tracking people feels quite dodgy and ominous. But then on the other hand, I guess there might be a kind of safety benefit to knowing where people are. I think it'd probably be quite hard to justify tracking self-employed people. I guess if people kind of took part in a kind of cycle survey, like, consented to do that would be a really interesting way of like actually getting a kind of on the ground picture of how people are traveling at work. But yeah, I think the idea of like mandatory tracking, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. Kind of interested in what other people do.
Lee, do you want to come in with something? Lee?
Hi everybody. Yeah. I got you. Thanks. I think on that subject of tracking, actually, just picking up on that, any self-employed rider using the Deliveroo or Uber Eats, they're all tracked, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, as you're saying it, I think you must be right, because apps, they know where people are in relation to like
they're tracked and penalised as well, I think, under certain circumstances, or it's certainly used in the process of managing their interactions and their abilities to work. But I raised my hand after the question about what's happening in other countries, and I'm have really good cargo bike logistics connections in the Netherlands and in Belgium, and certainly in the Netherlands. My colleagues there tell us that the police are really, really hot on whatever term you want to use, illegal motorbike or illegal e-bike or Frankenstein bike. And what one suggestion was that out of the the many thousands of e-bikes that are maybe doing Deliveroo type food delivery work in Amsterdam itself, there's probably only half a dozen of these crazy kind of Frankenstein bikes, because there are serious penalties if you're found with one. There's education, and there's a lot of information about that, the fact that there are serious fines, and the police there are all over it. So I think there's a lot to be learned from how other countries are dealing with it. But I recognise also that we're quite a way behind in terms of all types of cycling culture, certainly compared to the Netherlands. And then one other thing that I put in the chat was around a lot of the technical discussion and questions about who should, what should happen, or who should do what, or where the government comes into it. And I just wondered whether, Izzy, there'd been any interaction with the Bicycle Association around the technical aspects, because as I said in the chat, I'm part of a group within the organisation that have been working on aspects of guidelines and guidance and policy, and there's a great wealth of information that could be relevant to the topics that have been discussed within that organisation.
Thank you, Lee. Izzy, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think one of your colleagues at the Bicycle Association actually talked to us during the research and was really, really helpful. And we'll get a shout out in the report as well. But yeah, it was really helpful to understand the kind of, I guess, the kind of this kind of picture of illegal e-bikes then kind of having an impact on the rest of the industry. I think was really helpful to understand.
Bob, I'll let you come in with one more, and then we are going to have to wrap up.
Oh, okay, yeah. Just as a model which did exist, there was a company called Gorillas, which has now gone bust in this country. And what they did is all their workers, all their delivery guys were paid. They were paid above London living wage. And they used e-bikes which were provided for them, which were fully legal, and they were actually tracked. So now there's a problem here is that traditionally cyclists don't want stuff like tracking because that comes into number plates and whatnot. But it did show that by actually providing the vehicle, in this case an e-bike, and by actually paying them properly, is you got round the sort of kind of problems we've been talking about. Having said that, there was another problem in that they claimed they were grocery delivery, and they claimed they would deliver the groceries within 5 minutes from the call being made. Now, the problem then is that you obviously do have still an incentive to jump lights, etc. So I'm not sure that it was perfect, but it's something to be brought up whenever people are established things. I just want to ask, Izzy, I have heard that the research is ongoing. Is that correct? Is it the case that you are still willing to accept information and stuff, or what?
Yeah, definitely. So our report is pretty much finished, but I think we'd obviously really like to carry on working on this. So yeah, we'd love to have any more information. If anyone wants to chat more about it or send resources or anything, that would be really, really useful. Definitely.
Brilliant.
I think partly because, sorry, I've heard that there is yeah, like I said, we're going to try and engage with the APPG for cycling and walking on this. So be especially useful going into that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Izzy. That's been really, covered such a lot of ground, things that have been popping up every week, often in our news when people have been coming with kind of some of the issues around kind of delivery riders and the kind of backlash against them in many places. So hopefully that's been kind of really useful for people attending the session. As I said, we will have kind of a couple of future sessions on this. We've got definitely one probably in the early spring. So yes, but a huge thank you and best of luck with launching the report, and hopefully you'll come on and just let us know sometime when that's been published and share the link. I'm sure people will be really interested to read it. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. Just leaves me to say that next week we are going to go to Bradford. We've got Will Ridley Ellis and Darren Bradley, who are going from Bradford City Council, who are going to talk about the transformation of the city centre in time for their big year of City of Culture next year. So Bradford's the place to spend a weekend. So start making plans now. And on that note, we will see you all next week. Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.